Greg Sankey, it's good to see you. I hope you're well.
I am. It's good to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. I just flew in from Memphis, like two tables down.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so what?
It's just the reality of bouncing from city to city on the radio.
Okay. Well, good. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't even catch that.
It's a metaphor.
I was like, hold on a minute. So you actually went to Memphis, and we were the second. Okay, sorry, my head went spinning there. But want to certainly get your topic to get you to talk about a couple of current topics. The attendance numbers in college football. I know this may or may not affect the SEC, but I think John Solomon, CBS Sports, reported as a college football whole as an average, 5-year consecutive, that it's declined as an average in college football. How concerned are you in the SEC that maybe the attendance part of things could be sliding a little bit when you talk about fan attendance?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word concern because I think the word attentive applies. And over the last 5 years, we've had a working group focusing on fans and the fan experience that has caused some changes. What you see on video screens around replay didn't happen. And we realized, it was very restricted. We realized you could see that at home, and we need to open that up in stadium. We've talked and completed surveys on what our fans want because we are very attentive to that. We've had continued very strong ticket sales, and we've had strong attendance, and we continue to lead in attendance nationally. But we shouldn't assume things will always be constant in life. And how do we continue to maybe add some events? How do we make the tailgating special? Coming to campus is a feature that NFL teams don't have, and remembering the old days and seeing old friends. And we have an atmosphere around our games that we want to continue to make sure is secure, is strong, and is enjoyable, because that feeds into attendance. I think scheduling is part of that, and that's actually a conversation that our athletics directors have had individually. We've had it collectively. This is the first year we've got a mandated game beyond our 8 conference games among the other 5 conferences that are on the autonomy group. So those are some of the ideas that help to keep building or maintaining and then building enthusiasm around attending games.
Do you see the 9th game, conference game, as a possibility?
It has been talked about, but 2 years in our rearview mirror. We spent 18 months, and that's not a direction that our membership is interested in pursuing.
All right, let me go to the SEC championship game here for a couple of minutes. And I know it's a revenue booster, but could you ever see where college football playoff affects that game so much that it would even be talked about of putting that game to the side? I mean, you and I measure more feasibility. You ever see that as a topic of conversation?
That's not one to which I'm open, because of the special nature of the SEC's championship game, which you go back and credit Roy Kramer and the leaders in the early 90s at seeing that opportunity, taking full advantage of that opportunity. And what's happened is now every other bowl subdivision conference has followed along with their own. Now that the Big 12 will reinstitute it, and the Sun Belt Conference even has said they'll have a conference championship game. Ours is special, and you trade that for what? You would trade that for a game where and a game when. So you have to contemplate expanding beyond 4 teams in the college football playoff. And that's a conversation that took a long time to get us to 4 teams. We've had 2 years of that experience that I think has worked incredibly well. It's maintained the bowl system. Our conference game has stayed strong. So I think there's a lot of health now. And you'd have to really do some convincing to say a different direction is appropriate.
When you look at the SEC, there's a lot of positives. Obviously, I have a full-time job because of SEC college football.
Me too.
10 years ago, I probably wouldn't be having a job talking college football. So there's a lot of positives, and I know sometimes we talk about maybe some of the negatives. Let me ask you about the NCAA and Ole Miss. How involved are you in that case?
Well, I won't speak about the Ole Miss matter, but I will speak generally that our role is as an advisor. That's been designated for our office for 12, 13 years. We're not investigators. We work to be honest with our institutions and to help them address concerns proactively. And that's where most of our effort is. And then when issues do arise, we're in consultation with them through the process.
But when you look how your role is to be the moderator between 14 different schools, and you don't want anybody else to get an unfair advantage. obviously. Walk us through sort of that process. Do coaches, do they call you first, or they call someone in your office to report something, or does that go straight? Does it bypass the SEC? What's that process like when you have a coach that wants to accuse another coach within the conference of doing something wrong?
It was a process established by a unanimous vote of our members back in 2004. We had a task force that looked at the issue. We actually have a working group re-examining how we handle those types of matters. And we set a policy in place, which is it's expected our coaches will identify those concerns either to the conference office or directly to the NCAA. It's up to them. I think we've done well in establishing credibility and trust and working to address those issues. And when a matter arises, we anonymously go to the other institution, provide them the information we have, require that they address that within a certain period of time. Many of our institutions will use outside counsel to help in that. That's not us. We're not investigators. We are not the enforcement staff for NCAA rules. You may be in a situation where you know that there is a problem identified that is then reported to the NCAA. All of what are called secondary violations are actually level 3 and level 4, go through our office, and I have a role sitting in judgment as it relates to, is it complete, is it credible from a reporting standpoint, and then should we accept the institution's penalties or impose more. So that's the process, which may not seem that interesting, but it's pretty specific, and our institutions understand how it works.
When you talk about conduct, as someone who makes my living off of college football, I don't enjoy going to these websites, and it's like the police blotter sometimes. And I know that's the off season. Sometimes you have players getting in trouble, and it's happened across a lot of different schools. What is your role, and where do you stand with maybe a universal, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, a universal policy in the SEC where you maybe take some of that power out of the coach's hands and it's more of a universal policy? Would you be for something like that?
Well, your first question is what's my role? So I've been assigned a role as it relates to transfer student athletes who have areas of misconduct, what we call serious misconduct, particularly as it relates to interpersonal violence during their previous enrollment. I have a role in reviewing waivers because they're ineligible for athletics aid and scholarships under our rules now. So if there is a waiver and some justification that should be considered, I sit, if you will, at the end of the hall in judgment of whether that waiver should be provided. Beyond that, misconduct issues, accountability issues are determined at the campus level. Our campus have policies and structures for how that's applied. Some people observe it's too flexible, others say it's too stringent. Our membership assigns to the commissioner's office duties. We have talked repeatedly and at length about a common drug testing procedure, but the majority of our members do not favor that approach. And there are tensions between just the accountability and the behavioral adjustment that's needed. And there'll be a time when that conversation comes up again, and we'll see as people change and thinking changes if there's a greater role for the conference to play.
I know this is a football sort of address, but I'd love to be able to get you to talk about baseball for a couple of minutes, if that's okay. When we look at baseball, you've got some coaches who talk about the restrictions of 11.7 scholarships. Would you be for upping that number where, for one, you look at safety for pitchers and the stress on the shoulders and the amount of players that it requires. Unlike softball, where you may have 3 or 4 pitchers on your roster, you need a lot more in that baseball. 11.7 is where the cap is. Would you be for upping that number across the board in the SEC?
My first observation is college baseball is thriving right now, so we need to be careful about adjustments, and we need to consider fully the financial aid model and understand that a collegiate baseball roster includes 35 baseball players. So the 11.7 number relates to athletic-specific scholarships, and there's a lot now, a lot more than 10 years ago, that's exempted from counting towards the team limits. So some people react, like within the state of Alabama, and say, oh yeah, those lottery scholarships. But also a lot of institutional aid is now excluded from that team count. Let's understand that at a baseline. I would not suggest we just look at 11.7 in baseball. I'd suggest we look at the equivalency model overall, because that applies to softball and soccer and track and field, and ask ourselves, is that still the appropriate financial aid model? Should we be looking at some head count or modified head count so there's more consistency in aid that flows in those sports. I think that is the larger question, actually. And if that was answered in a certain way, certainly it would increase the aid that could flow to young people participating in a sport like baseball.
But you understand where some of the programs are saying, you have in-state supported scholarship programs at a lot of different schools where you don't have that flexibility. I mean, you understand where the fan bases are complaining about 11.7, right? I mean, you can hear what they're or try to understand what they're trying to say.
Well, usually, so let's just talk about 11.7. I think I could take a vote of baseball coaches, and 14-0 would vote to increase 11.7. And then we get into differences. So if you look at records, there's no assurance that state scholarships produce success within a team. You've got a new stadium, a new coach at the University of Alabama. That stadium, that facility commitment is a significant game changer because we've got a lot of other campuses with facilities. You could go across the border into Mississippi without state scholarships and see a team that's played for a College World Series championship in the not-too-distant memory and 2 top 10 programs this year. The factors around competitive success don't just boil down to financial aid. Would it be helpful to have a more consistent model? I think so, actually, so don't lose that. But also, I don't think you can boil it down to just one point and say, boy, that would be the difference maker that would change the competitive balance completely.
Is that on the discussion table? I mean, is that
not in a central way? There was a working group the NCAA had looking at financial aid, and at this moment, in this day, I don't know exactly where that stands. We through correspondence have said, let's take, as we look at financial aid, let's look at the equivalency model and ask, is that still relevant today? It was adopted in the early 70s. When scholarship limits were first established, but it's not gained the kind of traction I might have expected. And,
right.
and I'm an advocate for looking at that, by the way.
Sure.